here we are again, back in front of the camera, back by the side of the bar, and ready to carry on this morning. Now, there's a lot of intensity around at the moment on the national and international scene, but not so much on the local scene. We're taking a look at a variety of things that need investigating. Stuart Dolby is out there poking around, and I'm in here keeping the home fires burning. So it's a nice relaxing coffee morning with Mr. Keith, and we'll take a look at one or two little non-consequential things that might put you to sleep or might get you to say, oh. Now, one of the things that we are showing is what we call tall tales. And most of those tall tales come from me over a lifetime of radio and television. I've done that and been there. So we want to reflect a little bit of my experience. And one is my history of flying, both as a passenger and as a pilot. So let's as a sit back, relax, get yourself a cup of coffee, and if you're of a mind, listen to my tall tale about I'm a very accomplished flyer now, but way back in the 60s, when commercial jets still were being tested on commercial flights, then getting on board an aircraft was something of a trauma. We sat there hoping like hell that the pilot knew what he was doing and that he would get us down at the other end. And of course the pilots didn't know what they were doing, and they did get us down at the other end. But then again, air crashes became front page news, and it seemed always there was a crash just before I was supposed to fly. And so I wasn't the best flyer. Then one morning, somebody at the station, the radio station I was working at, said, "Oh, someone's got to go up in a light aircraft and do traffic reports." Ha ha ha, I said, "They're not getting me into that." Guess who they came knocking on the door to? Hayes, you go out, you do the traffic reports. Well, I had no choice. I couldn't say no, I had to do it. So indeed I did. And away I went each morning, getting up at about 4:30, driving out to the airport and getting there about 5 o'clock, marching over to the far side of the airfield and getting into a Cessna 172, taking off, soaring above the city and passing on information about what was happening in the traffic. Wow. It took me 2 or 3 days to get used to the fact that this is what I was going to do twice a day. But then eventually I began to calm down and began to quite enjoy it. I enjoyed it so much, in fact, that I fell asleep one morning. I dozed, and the pilot said, "I think your station is calling you." And I heard the magic words, and now we're going up above the city, above the traffic, to see what was happening on the roads. So I opened my eyes, looked down, and immediately began to give a report. And the report was that there was a big jam of buses near the Oak Street Bridge, which went over the Fraser River. Wow! what a report. And then as we turned the aircraft and flew away, I realized that this was the bus terminal. I had just said that there were traffic jams of buses, and I'd been looking down at where the buses congregated before they set out on their morning routes. It's nothing like a great report. The pilot turned to me and he said, "You know, you've got this job licked.
it's a bit boring, isn't it? And I said, well, yeah, it is really. No, I mean, not much to say other than what's going on in the traffic. I try to brighten it up a little bit with a little quip here and there, but right, tomorrow morning, he said, you get in the left-hand seat and I'll teach you to fly. And he did. And I was fortunate to have almost a year and a half of a flying experience. I logged 400 hours on the Cessna. I logged a couple of hours on a twin-engine aircraft and a couple of hours on other aircraft. I was the luckiest man in the world. And he put me into some pretty awful conditions. And we would fly up. I would give a report, and then we would do some what's known touch and goes. In other words, you land, you circle, you land, you circle, just to get some practice in. And we did. And one morning, a gust of wind took it, and I thought that the wing was going to be ripped off. Well, he grabbed the stick and managed to get us out of trouble. But it just shows the sort of thing that if you're going to be a professional pilot, that you have to put up with. So confident did we become on flying around together that he would set little tests, and he would say, there are clouds on the North Shore over the mountains. Why don't we go over and see if we can break the wings of this aircraft? Yes, let's do that. And we would deliberately fly into this mucky weather and get churned around and watch the wings, knowing full well that they wouldn't fall off. But daring. And it did turn out to be a lot of fun. I have to say, it turned out to be a lot of fun. A couple of other incidents. I used to take VIPs up in the afternoon and say, okay, here are some pollution issues and so on and so forth. And one afternoon we got my good friend, but also a colleague, Mrs. Grace McCarthy, who was the Deputy Prime Minister at the time. And we got out onto the runway and away we went. And a jet had taken off just before us, and it was a fairly still evening. So you can't see them, but the whirls of air caused by the jet's wings are still there. And sure enough, we got 3 or 4 feet from the ground, and away it went. We damn near lost the cabinet minister. The Deputy Prime Minister. Once again, he came to the rescue, flipped it over, and we managed to save the day. The other item that I think was worth reporting is that we flew backwards. Have you ever flown backwards, he said. And this young chap was about 21 or 22. He was a nice young fellow. We bought him a helmet and nicknamed him the Red Baron. And he was to die in tragic circumstances in a plane crash later on. But he was a nice young man and very helpful and lots of fun. And so we went, and he said, we need a marker. And the plane travels forward at about 100 miles or so an hour. Actually, it's a little over 72 miles for the takeoff speed. And he said that the wind this morning is particularly strong. So he put the nose of the aircraft into the strong wind, and we watched the bridge below. And although we were keeping airspeed, the plane started to travel backwards. So here we were in reverse, in a plane, in the sky, watching the bridge recede, while the plane powered forward at the correct speed, and the wind pushed us back. And that's the sort of nonsense that we would get up to. And there are lots of other stories I could tell you about my flying experience, but perhaps this last one will bring something of a smile to your lips. I was trying very hard to impress who later became my wife, my girlfriend at the time, Valerie, and I said, would you like to come flying, dear, and come out with me this afternoon, and we can go and we'll go and do some traffic reports, but we'll also take a look at the Vancouver from the air. How lovely. Yes, she said, that'd be super. Anyway, we got settled into the plane. I taxied out, checked with the tower. Yes, we were all okay. We were about to take off. There's nothing in our way. Rolled it out onto the runway and roared down the runway ready to take off. And the tower came on and said, MLA, MLA, is the call letters of the aircraft. You're going down the runway the wrong way. Oh my goodness me. We had to screech to a halt and take off the right way. She still married me. Well, that's my flying experience. I suppose I should fly off now. Till the next story, the next tall tale. Tiddlywip.
I always find it strange how two people can experience and view a place in completely different ways.
Jack Fuller was born into money, and at the age of 20 he moved to Brightling in East Sussex after inheriting land and a fortune from his uncle Rose. At the age of 22, Fuller became the Member of Parliament for Southampton. Fuller lost his seat after a vicious row over his support for slavery. This was the time when he began to focus more on his estate and his love of combining art and science.
I moved down from Glasgow to Sussex when I was 9 years old, and that would be in 2003. I first saw the Follies when my granddad was driving me through Brightling, and I remember looking at them and just asking him what these strange buildings were.
Jack Fuller was affectionately known as Mad Jack by local residents who did not understand his fascination with useless buildings. A folly is a building with no purpose other than decoration. The first of Jack's 6 follies was the summer house. Jack was a keen gambler, and he entered into a wager that he could see the spire of Dallington Church from his window. Upon realising that he was mistaken, he quickly constructed the sugarloaf to very effectively mimic the church spire.
I looked out of my girlfriend's window and I saw this strange building in the distance, and I asked her, what is this strange building? And she replied that it was the Sugarloaf. The first time I went, I remember I took my girlfriend there and I gave her a love letter.
The Rotunda Temple was built to hold artwork, most notably paintings commissioned from J.M.W. Turner. Jack was a philanthropist, and during an economic depression he hired hundreds of local labourers to build a huge wall around his estate. However, the wall did not stop trespassers.
We all thought the temple was full of art, and I was a bit shocked to find out that there was none. All I found when I first went in was graffiti left from the Canadian Air Force that was stationed on the estate during the Second World War.
The temple is the motif for the internationally renowned Brightling Horse Trials, which brings in competitors and spectators from all walks of life. The Hermit's Watchtower was built so that Jack could survey his land and have views of the sea.
The tower was my special place. I used to go there when I was feeling a bit down or I had to clear my mind. As you go up the stairs, on the right-hand side, my girlfriend's initials are still there. Mine, are not there anymore. When I was feeling alone, I would go to the top of the tower, I would lie down and stare through the open roof. I'd wait for nightfall, and then I would look at all the stars. Yeah, I would wonder what my place on this earth is, why I was here. And I would also wonder why the Follies are here. And, you know, it dawned on me that the Follies aligned almost with the stars. And it feels like some of them are there to replicate Orion's belt. Others are there to, you know, to be individual stars, like the observatory would be Betelgeuse. I've heard some people argue that the observatory is not a folly as it serves a purpose, but don't all the follies serve a purpose? Of our local history, our culture. When I first came to Sussex from Glasgow, I was such an outsider. People had no idea what I was saying, and I had to get something to point me in the right direction.
The obelisk dominates the landscape and is the second highest point in Sussex.
I remember looking up at the needle and realising that it pierces the vast, uninterrupted sky.
Jack Fuller commissioned the pyramid to be his mausoleum 24 years before his death. This immense structure draws attention away from the Thomas à Becket church, in whose graveyard it stands.
I've heard that Jack was buried in the pyramid sitting up on his armchair, with a glass of claret and a roast chicken dinner in front of him. The Follies are all focal points, but don't let them fool you. Their place in the landscape belies their size and their distance. In the beginning I was hungry to consume them, and I had rushed to each one in turn. But a short distance turned into a mile, a run into a trek. At last, I grew to love the surroundings and adopted the Follies as guides rather than destinations.
Jack Fuller was respected by many as a squire who, at a time of extreme poverty, when soldiers were returning from the Napoleonic War, did what he could to provide employment and prevent revolution. He was ridiculed by others for his views on slavery and his obsession with erecting follies while people were going hungry.
Fuller's Follies are an important part of my life and have helped me to find my place. I know many people have followed this path before I have, and I love nothing better than bringing new people to experience them and to fall in love like I did.
I think that Mad Jack Fuller is the sort of person that we should debate. All this nonsense from the woke brigade about pulling down statues of people who benefited from slavery and expecting apologies and so on and so forth is, I'm sorry, it's history. It's gone. It was the way that people thought of the time. And as I don't notice any of them backing off from some of the things that people who benefited from slavery brought. Mad Jack Fuller paid for and supported the Eastbourne lifeboat, the Eastbourne lighthouse, concerned that lives at sea shouldn't be lost, particularly since there was a disaster at New Haven with one of Her Majesty's ships in the late 1800s, which is still remembered in the little church, a Norman church, I may say, up on the hill in New Haven, in which lives were lost and actually gave rise to the New Haven lifeboat, which came by public subscription and was way ahead of the National Lifeboat Service by about 25 years. People who heard the cries for help of those who could not be saved haunted them for most of their lives. Well, Mad Jack took up the cudgel and made sure that funds were made available, that in Eastbourne similar things would not happen. But the madness of Mad Jack is such that it is reflected by these woke people who will watch television. In fact, they'll use television. But it was slavery, Mad Jack slavery, that provided the funds that made television possible. Mad Jack supported all sorts of research, but particularly two sets of research which saved lives, or at least one saved lives, and the other means that we can do today what I'm doing now, and that is talking to you on television. Mad Jack supported the research by a man called Davy. And Davy spent a great deal of time and research on developing and inventing a lamp which miners could safely take underground. And which they could shine to see their way in the dark of the pit without blowing themselves up. Many mine disasters in the early days of mining came about because a naked light was used to see whereabouts, to see how to go forward, how, in fact, to pick the coal, which was absolutely essential for the British economy. Well, Davy spent a lot of time and effort and a lot of money, a lot of Mad Jack's money, developing a lamp, the Davy lamp, which was hailed as a savior of human life because it could be lit safely underground without setting off any pockets of gas lurking in the pit. passageways. And it was all paid for by Mad Jack's money, which all came from slavery. Now, in a time of reform, it has to be said, Mad Jack refused to give in to the notion that slavery was wrong. He went to his death believing and supporting slavery. That may be worthy of some censure. But the other thing that he supported was a scientist, an inventor called Faraday, who invented something called Faraday's cage. And Faraday's cage was an invention that helped find out how radio waves could travel through the ether, how they could be blocked, and how they could be concentrated so that sound waves and picture waves could be transferred. And Faraday, although it was Logie Baird who invented television as such, Faraday's research, and to this day, Faraday's cage is looked at with awe, was supported by Mad Jack. Now, as you saw in that little video, Mad Jack lived in Brightling, but he also lived in Lewes. He lived in a house on School Hill, and controversially, he became the MP for Lewes. And he always endeared me as an MP because at the time of John Burkhoff, who was a pompous little man and was Speaker of the House, it was used historically that Mad Jack fell out with the Speaker of the House and was banned for 2 weeks for calling him a pipsqueak. The fights which they had with the Speaker is not so very long ago were replicating what Mad Jack did in the late 1800s. Yes, late 1800s. So I always felt very close to Mad Jack. But he was a character indeed. And there is a lady, Annette Lloyd Thomas, who is the wife of a Louisian, Rupert Lloyd Thomas, who is actually, I understand, living in Littlehampton right at this moment in time, who is always working hard towards making things happen in Lewes. He was a supporter of rocket radio. He got the Fell Hill climb going again. All in all, he is a well-known character, and his wife Annette has written the definitive book on Mad Jack Fuller. So if you want to know about Mad Jack in detail, get her book. But he went to Parliament representing us here in Lewes. His parents were born in the almost ghost town of Hamsey. His relatives, he had no offspring himself, his relatives still live here. And they live in a village called Opham, which is a flourishing little village on the edge of Lewes, but also about a mile from Hamsey. Hamsey, the ghost town; Opham, the flourishing town, or at least ghost village and flourishing village. And Opham is where it is because the plague hit Hamsey and devastated it. And the residents went and got thorn thickets and put them around the village so that people inside the village couldn't get out and people outside the village couldn't get in, so that they would not catch or spread bubonic plague, which actually, the bubonic plague devastated Britain so much that it actually killed half the population of the time. That's how desperate it was. And the people of Hamsey starved themselves to death rather than pass on this dreadful disease. And Hamsey, to this day, it's beginning to see some revival, but it's generally a little ghost village. And Mad Jack's parents were married on what was then a little island. It's not so much an island now because they've tampered with the river Ouse. But that was where Mad Jack came from, and in Opham, he's got relatives who are very proud to be Mad Jack's relatives, and so they should be. He's a character and a half, and that was a little take by some students, a take on Mad Jack, because he also built follies, and nobody really knows why he built follies. You saw in that little video that there's some of the follies that he built. But one of the things that he was very keen on was supporting the Napoleonic War, our war with France. And it is said that he would go to the top of his follies to see whether he could hear the sounds of battle coming across the channel. Other follies were because he wanted to fulfill a bet. He would bet people, and then if it looked as if he was going to lose, he would alter the bet by altering the terms. For instance, his home in Brittling, he built a tower because he'd bet somebody that they could see the tower from some point or other. And he built the tower because it turned out that he was going to lose the bet. So the tower was built, and he attached it to one of the buildings in Brittling. He also, I think it's Bodiam Castle, took the castle, which is a beautiful, beautiful castle, when it was falling to pieces, and spent some of his money on putting it back together again. There are so many signs of Mad Jack's influence across East Sussex. And the name Fuller is revered. It's also the name of a brewery. I'm not quite sure whether that was Mad Jack's or not. But here was a character and a half. He's 22 stone when he died. And the fact that there is such a wonderful legend that he is still sitting in a pyramid which sits in a Brittling churchyard, as you saw, and that he is sitting there, card in hand, food in front of him, and his favorite claret sitting waiting for him to drink. It shows the influence and the power of the man during his day. That is Mad Jack Fuller. The other great character is Horatio Bottomley. Horatio Bottomley lived in a big mansion which he had built in Upper Dicker. Upper Dicker, a village no more than 5 miles from Lewes. This man, who had opulence and gave parties that were beyond description and lived a huge and wonderful lifestyle, was an MP, was a great recruiter for the British government for the First World War, was born into a family that had to give him up, and at the age of 5 was sent to an orphanage in Erdington in Birmingham. This orphanage was a particularly fierce organization with a huge and very fierce discipline. Horatio Bottomley grew up under those circumstances. He obviously learned survival during that period, got himself a job in a law office, and spent it wisely learning about the law. And he used that law to set it up an investment company, if you like. And he persuaded, because he was silver-tongued, people to invest in some mines, some gold mines in Australia, which turned out to be no more than a hole in the ground. There was no gold in them at all. But he made a fortune. And from the fortune, he went into publishing. And to this day, there is one of his publications still going, the Financial Times. He founded the Financial Times. He also founded a magazine called John Bull, which was very jingoistic and rah-rah Britain, but it lasted into the 1960s. The trouble is that Mad Jack used, Horatio Bottomley used all this opulence and all this wealth from being a con artist. Not only did the gold mines not exist, but also he had war bonds and saving bonds and competitions in his newspapers into which people poured money. And the thing is that he made sure that members of his staff were the winners of the competition, and the money went back into his pocket. And eventually he was found out and he was sent to prison. And after 7 years, he tried coming out. He tried to resume his life of opulence and just couldn't make it. Times had changed. He didn't. He wasn't that well known, and he died a relative pauper compared to what it was. But if you want his opulence in Upper Dicker, just a few miles away, such that he had his own racing stables, so that people could come to his parties. He had a railway station built, so the trains could stop and let them get to this relatively remote village. It still is relatively remote. And he lived the life of Riley and had a marvelous time. Kevin, thank you so much. Here we are. We actually, it's Tuesday, and we test we test the beer. So let me stop my narrative for a minute. Well, it's good. And here I have my drink before the sun is over the yardarm. Before the sun is over the yardarm. Tastes much better then. The better Horatio, and he was great on the campaign trail. He won his seats with massive electoral landslides. He was a favorite of the Speaker, and all in all was a most attractive personality. Now, what he did is replicated quite often in modern day life. When I was in Canada, I had some friends who lived in north central British Columbia in a place called Terrace. And they had a summer home on a lake called La Kelse Lake. And I can remember the father of my friends saying that he had just had an inquiry about the state of La Kelse mines. And he had no knowledge of these mines. They had been fictitiously made in areas which were very difficult to get to, so nobody could check. And the Vancouver Stock Exchange was a penny stock exchange. In other words, nobody looked too carefully, and there wasn't too much regulation about selling penny stocks, dime stocks, in fact. I bought a few myself at some stage. It was a crazy thing to do because you're bound to lose your money. They were all speculative. But this was the way that people would sell, say, in Montreal, stocks of a mine in Vancouver, or at least in British Columbia, which virtually didn't exist. And I've done, one of my tall tales is about my brush with the mafia. And one of the things that the mafia would do is they would launch a stock on the poorly regulated, weakly regulated Vancouver Stock Exchange and sell 10-cent shares in a mine. And they would actually provide reports of finds of whatever it was that they were mining. It could be gold, it could be minerals, it could be all sorts of things. But what they would do is they would take some of their mafia soldiers, they would put them on the perimeter of the area that they claimed was where they were mining, toss a few sticks of dynamite onto the permafrost, boom, boom, boom. Nobody could get in to see what was going on because the soldiers, the foot soldiers, the mafia soldiers were there to make sure that they couldn't. And then they would make reports of finds, and that would boost the value of the stock. All the time, there was nothing there to substantiate the shares, but the shares would zoom. They would sell them quickly, pocket the money, and then forget about the whole thing. So that sort of con has been around for a long time. But Mad Jack made an absolute fortune out of it, and it was he paid the price, but in between time lived a tremendous life and lifestyle, having come up from being just a poor boy poor boy in an orphanage in Erdington, which is a suburb of Birmingham, leading a very, very hard life to begin with, but using native wit, native talent, very carefully learning all sorts of things by patiently taking jobs which were menial. And there we are. It is that Horatio Bottomley, Mad Jack Fuller, and there are tons more, which we will reveal to you over this coming period of Mirador's new look, new style. I hope that you'll enjoy it. It's a bit haphazard, a bit higgledy-piggledy. And today didn't go to according to plan, but that's okay. We hope that we're versatile enough to make sure that it was we filled it with stuff that would make you have interest. Let's let's take a little break before we carry on with our last session, and we'll be back in, say, about 10 minutes. Does that sound a good time to be back? Yes, it does, I think. So here we go with our little stings and our little identifiers. Doodle-pip.